Normandy, June 7, 1944. The morning air over Normandy trembled with gunfire. Smoke rolled across the beaches, curling over broken landing craft and the charred skeletons of tanks half buried in the surf. The war's thunder had not yet faded, it merely shifted inland. Just 5 miles beyond the beaches, a small, olive-drab aircraft lifted off from a rough, makeshift field. Its tiny engine buzzed like an insect against the vastness of the sky. This was not a fighter, nor a bomber. It carried no armor, no guns. The plane's fabric wings rippled in the wind as it climbed, a Piper L-4 Grasshopper, the unarmed eyes of the Allied Army. Inside, Captain Charles "Chuck" Carpenter, a U.S. Army artillery observer, adjusted his headset. His mission was simple, but suicidal: spot German positions hidden in the hedgerows and relay coordinates to the 4th Armored Division below. The Grasshopper's cockpit was barely more than a glass bubble, no metal shielding, no instruments beyond a compass, altimeter, and radio. A stray rifle bullet could rip through the fuselage. Still, Carpenter leaned forward, peering down at the French countryside unfolding beneath him. The fields below looked peaceful from above, neat, green, divided by narrow dirt roads and stone walls. But Carpenter knew the Germans were there. Tigers. Panthers. Camouflaged under the trees, their turrets waiting for a glint of Allied metal. He clicked the transmitter. Battery able, this is Grasshopper 1. Marking enemy armor grid 24-7-2. Fire for effect. A pause. Then, in the distance, a thunderous crack echoed. Shells screamed through the sky and erupted in blossoms of earth and flame. From above, Carpenter watched the chaos unfold, German tanks lurching, soldiers scattering. Good hit. Adjust 10 yards north, he called. The Piper shuddered slightly in the turbulence, but Carpenter kept steady. Every movement mattered. He was flying at treetop height, the engine barely pushing 80 miles an hour. Below, a column of German troops opened fire, tracer round streaking upward, missing by feet. The little Grasshopper weaved away, almost dancing through the air, its pilot invisible against the clouds. These aircraft, dismissed by many as toys, had become the Allies' most reliable scouts. Built from the civilian Piper Cub, the L-4 Grasshopper was small enough to fit inside a cargo glider, light enough to lift off from a dirt road, and slow enough to hover above a target without stalling. To the soldiers below, it was a miracle. To the Germans, it was a nightmare, a harmless-looking speck that somehow summoned artillery rain with uncanny precision. By noon, the battlefield had changed. The German counterattack slowed to a crawl. Allied tanks advanced under Carpenter's direction, crushing through the bocage. And above them, circling like a hawk over its prey, the Piper L-4 watched it all, fragile, fearless, and irreplaceable. Carpenter landed later that afternoon, his aircraft riddled with small holes but miraculously intact. He stepped out, covered in dust and sweat, grinning like a man who'd just outrun death. His mechanic pointed to the damage and said, "You brought her back on prayer, sir." Carpenter patted the side of his plane and replied, "She's all I need, and the Germans know it." The Piper L-4 Grasshopper, born from simplicity, built for observation, and destined to shape the ground war more than anyone could have imagined, was just beginning its legend. The Piper L-4 Grasshopper wasn't built to fight. It didn't carry bombs, nor did it have guns. Yet, in the chaos of World War II, it became one of the most feared and indispensable aircraft on the front lines, not because of its firepower, but because of what it could see. May 1944, Italy. The morning mist hangs low over the rolling hills near Monte Cassino. From the ground, the little green plane looks fragile, almost toy-like, as it rises into the sky. But to Lieutenant Charles "Chuck" Carpenter of the 1st Armored Division, this fragile machine is a lifeline. His L-4, affectionately nicknamed "Miss Me," hums softly as it climbs to 800 feet. Below him, the world unfolds like a tactical map. He can see German supply trucks snaking through valleys, artillery flashes from the ridges, and plumes of smoke marking hidden batteries. Armed only with a grease pencil and a radio, Carpenter relays the coordinates to Allied gunners waiting below. Within minutes, shells whistle through the air and explode precisely where he had directed. That was the genius of the Grasshopper, simplicity that outsmarted complexity. It could take off from dirt roads, land on cow pastures, or hover just above tree lines. It flew low and slow, often under radar detection, giving ground forces real-time intelligence that changed the tide of battles. The Germans, frustrated by this tiny scout plane's accuracy, began calling them Die verdammten Grasshopper, the damned grasshoppers. They learned to fear its arrival. Wherever a grasshopper circled, destruction soon followed. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's world was intimate and raw. There were no armor plates, no bulletproof glass. The engine vibrated against thin aluminum skin, the wind clawed at the open side windows. Carpenter could smell the gunpowder from below, hear the distant cracks of rifles. Every mission was a gamble. One lucky burst from a machine gun could tear the little plane apart. But that's what made these pilots extraordinary. They were volunteers, artillery spotters, often without fighter training, flying alone in unarmed planes over enemy territory. They called themselves the Flying Jeeps, soldiers who traded wheels for wings. During the breakout from Anzio, Grasshoppers became the silent eyes of Operation Diadem. Pilots like Carpenter directed thousands of artillery rounds a day, adjusting fire in real time. The results were devastating. German strongpoints shattered before their troops even knew they were spotted. And when the weather turned, when fog blanketed the front and no other aircraft could fly, the Grasshopper still went up. Its pilots trusted instinct and terrain memory, navigating by landmarks, not instruments. One wrong move meant clipping a tree or slamming into a hillside, but the mission always came first. By late 1944, the Piper L-4 had proven something extraordinary. War wasn't just won by speed or firepower, but by vision, the ability to see what others couldn't. And from its glass cockpit, men like Carpenter saw more than just targets. They saw the rhythm of war, its patterns, its chaos, and the thin line between survival and oblivion. As Carpenter banked his Grasshopper back toward Allied lines, he caught sight of tracer fire below. A German machine gun crew had spotted him. Bullets streaked through the air, snapping past his wings. He dove low, weaving through the valley, the small plane shaking violently. His observer shouted coordinates. Even under fire, they were still spotting. Seconds later, the Allied artillery roared to life. The gun position vanished in smoke and dirt. Carpenter grinned. The little Grasshopper had survived again. September 1944, France. The war is deep in its turning point, and the Piper L-4 Grasshopper has already earned its place as the silent observer of the battlefield. But one man would take this unarmed scout plane and turn it into something no one had imagined, a personal attack aircraft. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Charles Carpenter, though to the men of the 4th Armored Division, he was known simply as Bazooka Charlie. Carpenter wasn't content to just watch battles unfold from the sky. A born daredevil with a mischievous grin, he saw his little Piper L-4 as more than a spotter plane. He saw potential. "If I can fly over the enemy," he once said, "why can't I shoot at them too?" So one evening, in a muddy field near Verdun, Carpenter began a field modification that would make history. Using duct tape, scrap metal, and sheer stubbornness, he mounted 6 M1 bazookas, 3 on each wing strut of his Piper L-4. Each launcher was wired to a simple battery switch inside the cockpit. It was primitive, unstable, and borderline suicidal, but it worked. The next morning, as the sun rose over the French countryside, Rosie the Rocketeer, as he nicknamed his Grasshopper, lifted off. Below, German Panther tanks were rumbling along a forest road. Carpenter climbed to just 600 feet, lined up his approach, and dove. The bazookas fired in succession, their rockets streaking toward the armored column. 2 direct hits, 1 tank engulfed in flame. The rest scattered. It was official. The world's first bazooka-armed reconnaissance plane had entered the war. Word spread fast through the ranks. At first, his commanding officers dismissed it as reckless heroism. But after Carpenter destroyed 6 tanks in a single day, the legend grew. Soldiers began looking to the skies for his little L-4, a symbol of defiance, courage, and American ingenuity. From then on, Carpenter waged a one-man air war across France. He'd dive out of the sun, fire his bazookas, then skim treetops to escape enemy fire. German troops reportedly started calling his plane the Mad Major's Dragonfly. Even more remarkable was how the Grasshopper itself held up under these extreme conditions. Despite being designed for observation, the L-4's light frame absorbed recoil from the bazookas with surprising grace. The Continental engine hummed faithfully even under stress, its simplicity proving to be its greatest strength. Every flight was a dance with death. Carpenter flew without armor, often returning with bullet holes in his wings or fuel lines cut. But each time, he patched up the plane, reloaded his bazookas, and took off again. When asked what drove him, Carpenter replied simply, "When I see the bastards below me, I feel like I have the whole world at my back." By war's end, Bazooka Charlie had destroyed or disabled at least 6 German tanks and several armored vehicles, all from the cockpit of an unarmed observation plane. His courage turned the humble Piper L-4 from a supporting character into a headline act. But more than that, he personified what the Grasshopper stood for: improvisation, grit, and courage in the face of impossible odds. Every soldier who saw that small silhouette above the battlefield knew, the Grasshopper wasn't just a plane. It was a promise, that ingenuity could turn even the smallest machine into a weapon of legend. Autumn 1944. Across Europe, the front line stretched like a jagged scar, from the beaches of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes. Amid the chaos, a quiet fleet of slender, high-wing aircraft hummed over the fields. They were not glamorous. They carried no bombs, fired no guns, and flew slower than most birds. Yet they were among the most indispensable machines in the Allied arsenal, the Piper L-4 Grasshoppers. While Bazooka Charlie, Carpenter grabbed headlines, hundreds of anonymous pilots flew these unassuming planes daily, often without fanfare or recognition. They were artillery spotters, medical evac pilots, courier messengers, and sometimes lifelines to entire battalions cut off behind enemy lines. One such pilot was Lieutenant James "Red" Morrison, a farm boy from Iowa who had never flown anything more complex than a crop duster before the war. On November 18, 1944, Red's mission was to spot German positions along the Siegfried Line. He flew low, too low, weaving between flak bursts and bursts of small arms fire. Below him, a U.S. artillery unit waited for coordinates. Every second counted. Just 200 yards north, Morrison radioed, as tracer fire whizzed past his cockpit. Seconds later, shells thundered down on the enemy position, silencing a German battery that had pinned down American troops for hours. When he landed, Morrison's L-4 had 7 bullet holes in its fuselage, 1 through the wing strut, and the oil pressure barely holding. But his report saved dozens of lives that day. His aircraft, patched together with fabric, wood, and willpower, would be airborne again by sunrise. These men flew without parachutes, armor, or backup. The L-4 was so light that bailing out offered no advantage. Survival meant skill, instinct, and luck. Some called them flying targets. Others called them angels. And the Grasshoppers weren't confined to Europe. In the jungles of Burma, in the deserts of North Africa, in the island campaigns of the Pacific, wherever there was a front, there was an L-4. In the Pacific, the plane proved especially valuable for marine artillery coordination. Pilots often landed on makeshift strips hacked out of coral or sand, their tires kicking up dust as they delivered messages or wounded soldiers. Sometimes they flew through tropical storms, trusting their compass and courage more than the instruments in front of them. The plane's simplicity was its genius. Its 65-horsepower Continental engine, its two-band fabric frame, and its manual flight controls made it easy to repair and nearly impossible to ground for long. Mechanics could replace a wing in under an hour, patch a bullet hole with tape and dope, and send the aircraft back to the sky before dusk. It was said that when the Grasshoppers flew overhead, soldiers felt watched over, protected. Not by gods or generals, but by fellow soldiers who shared their risk, only higher up. General George Patton once remarked, "It's the eyes of the army. Without them, our guns are blind." He wasn't exaggerating. Over 15,000 Piper L-4s were built, and nearly every major division used them. Yet most of their pilots never received medals or press. Their victories were measured not in confirmed kills, but in battles avoided, artillery saved, and lives spared. As the war dragged into its final brutal winter, the Grasshoppers kept flying. Over frozen rivers and bombed-out towns, their tiny silhouettes crossed the gray skies, a whisper amid the roar of war. They had no armor, no speed, no glamour. But they had something the enemy couldn't outmatch: presence. April 1945. Western Germany. The war was collapsing into its final, chaotic days. Convoys of Allied armor snaked toward the Elbe River while the skies buzzed with everything from B-17s to gliders. Yet high above a muddy airstrip near Kassel, a single Piper L-4 circled lazily, its pale wings flashing in the morning light. Inside sat Lieutenant Harold "Hal" Roberts, a 25-year-old artillery spotter who had flown over 200 missions since D-Day. His co-pilot's seat was empty, his only company was a folded map and a field radio wired crudely to the dashboard. Below him, German columns were retreating through the forest. His voice crackled over the radio, calm, precise, and unshaken. "Adjust fire, battery 27, range 800. Deflection 205. A moment later, shells whistled down like iron rain. Through the haze, Roberts saw smoke bloom along the tree-line, direct hit. He banked sharply, scanning for anti-aircraft fire, but none came. The enemy was finished. He returned to base, landed on a strip barely longer than a football field, and killed the engine. The silence was deafening. Mechanics approached, smiling, exhausted. Behind them, a group of infantrymen gathered around his plane, not to admire it, but to thank him. His spotting run had cleared the road for their advance. In that moment, the Piper L-4 Grasshopper wasn't just a reconnaissance plane. It was a symbol of ingenuity, of grit, and of how something so small could make an empire shake. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, the Grasshoppers were everywhere, parked along hedgerows, sitting beside airfields, perched on hilltops like tired birds. Some had bullet holes patched with tin, others bore hand-painted names like Miss Liberty, Bugsy, or Sky Worm. Pilots who survived gathered for photos beside their planes, smiling awkwardly, knowing this chapter of history, their chapter, was closing. But for many, it wasn't the end. After the war, the Piper L-4 became the foundation of civilian aviation's post-war boom. Thousands of surplus Grasshoppers were sold to private pilots, flying clubs, and bush operators. They carried mail into mountain towns, surveyed farmland, and trained a new generation of aviators. The same aircraft that once guided artillery fire now taught peace. In Korea, modified L-4s continued their service, this time as forward air control planes. Their lineage extended into the O-1 Bird Dog and later OV-10 Bronco, both owing design and tactical philosophy to the little Piper that could. Even today, restored Grasshoppers fly in museums and airshows around the world. The sound of their small engine still echoes faintly, a living connection to the thousands of men who once relied on them in war. A few veterans, now in their twilight years, still remember what it felt like to sit inside that canvas cocoon, the smell of oil and cordite, the the rattle of the wind through the fuselage, the hum of the propeller that seemed too fragile for war. One pilot once said, "When you were up there, it wasn't about power or glory. You were the eyes of everyone down below, and sometimes, that was enough." The Piper L-4 Grasshopper was never built to fight. But it fought, in every way that mattered. With courage. With clarity. With a quiet defiance that outlasted the thunder of war. And long after the bombers and battleships have faded from memory, somewhere in a quiet field, the whisper of its wings still tells a story, of ordinary men in an extraordinary machine.